Welcome to Science for Sleep Deep Earth, a channel where curiosity slows down and science takes the long, meandering path that lets your mind wander into comfort. Tonight, I'd like to take you somewhere that feels both impossibly distant and vitally close, a place so dense with life, so layered with sound and silence, that it has captivated human imagination for centuries. It's a realm where the air itself seems to breathe, where trees tower like ancient pillars holding up a canopy of green that stretches as far as the eye can see. The Amazon rainforest, Earth's greatest theatre of life. Before we step gently into those emerald shadows, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you listening tonight? Are you somewhere with trees outside your window, where leaves rustle in the breeze? Or are you in a place where concrete and glass dominate, where green is a distant memory? Maybe you've walked through a forest before, feeling the cool shade and hearing the whisper of branches overhead. Or maybe forests are something you only know from pictures, documentaries, and stories. Either way, right now, you and I are about to drift together into a part of our world that is home to more life than almost anywhere else on the planet. Strange thought, isn't it? That in an age where we can see images from distant galaxies and map the surface of Mars, there are still places on Earth where scientists discover new species every few days. Places where the canopy is so thick that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. Places where the boundaries between earth, water, and air blur into a symphony of existence. If you find comfort in journeys like this one, slow explorations that invite you to learn, wonder, and maybe even doze along the way, I'd be grateful if you gave this a like or subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach others who might need a gentle pause in their day or a quiet companion at night. Thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing your curiosity with you. Now, let's begin to let the surface world slip away. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the rainforest for just a moment. Before you, a wall of green rises, dense and mysterious. The air is thick with moisture, warm against your skin. You can hear sounds, birds calling, insects humming, leaves rustling, but they blend into a tapestry rather than distinct notes. If you stepped forward into that green embrace, you would enter a world built in layers, each one a different realm of life. Imagine walking beneath those first trees, feeling the temperature drop as shade envelops you. The ground beneath your feet is soft, covered with fallen leaves, decomposing slowly, returning their nutrients to the soil. If you looked up, you'd see the canopy far above, a ceiling of leaves that filters sunlight into dappled patterns. Keep walking, and you'd notice how the forest seems to breathe around you, how everything is connected, how roots tangle with fungi, how vines climb toward light, how water drips from leaf to leaf in an endless cycle. And if you had the patience to stay, to watch and listen, you would begin to understand that this is not just a forest. It is a system, a living organism composed of millions of organisms, all working together, competing, cooperating, existing in a balance so complex that scientists are still trying to understand it. That is the Amazon rainforest. It sits quietly across the heart of South America, covering an area so vast it could swallow most of Europe. It stretches over 9 countries, though most of it lies within Brazil. It follows the path of the Amazon River, the largest river by volume in the world, and its countless tributaries that branch like veins through the landscape. The forest spans roughly 5.5 million square kilometers. That's about 2.1 million square miles. To put that in perspective, it's nearly as large as the entire United States. Just pausing on that number for a moment, it's hard to imagine what that much forest would even feel like. The diversity within it is staggering. Scientists estimate that the Amazon contains about 10% of all species on Earth. That means 1 in every 10 living things, from microscopic bacteria to towering trees, calls this place home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we drift too far into those layered depths, it's worth remembering that for most of human history, the rainforest was already mysterious enough without worrying about counting species or measuring carbon storage. Indigenous peoples lived within it for thousands of years, developing intricate knowledge of its plants, animals, and rhythms. To them, the forest was not a wilderness, but a home full of resources, spirits, and stories. The idea of the Amazon as an untouched, pristine wilderness is relatively modern and somewhat misleading. European explorers who ventured into the forest in the 16th and 17th centuries often described it with a mixture of awe and terror. It was a place of overwhelming abundance, but also of danger. Venomous snakes, biting insects, diseases they had never encountered, and a climate that felt suffocating. They told stories of tribes that vanished into the trees, of rivers so wide they seemed like seas, of forests so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. The Amazon was treated almost like another world, green and endless and unknowable. Even today, the rainforest remains more legend than reality for most people. We know it's there. We can see satellite images. We can watch documentaries that show its beauty and complexity. But those images don't sink in easily. 5.5 million square kilometers. 10% of all species. Numbers so large they resist easy visualization. That gap between knowing and truly grasping the scale is part of why the Amazon still feels so mysterious. It's not just a fact to memorize. It's an environment so vast and so complex that it challenges imagination. As we continue this journey, we won't rush. There's no need. The forest isn't going anywhere, at least not yet. It has been there for millions of years, shaped by climate, evolution, and the forces of life itself. It will continue as long as we allow it to. So we can take our time to drift inward slowly, letting curiosity unfold layer by layer. We'll explore how the forest was formed, how it functions as a system, and what creatures live within its shadows. We'll meet the trees that build the canopy, the animals that never touch the ground, and the rivers that carve through the green. We'll look at the relationship between the forest and the climate, how it creates its own weather and influences patterns across the globe. We'll even ask what it means that this vast living system is under threat, that every day a piece of it disappears. But for now, just notice the feeling of letting the modern world slip away. Think about the last time you stood under trees, whether in a park, a backyard, or a forest trail. Did you ever wonder what it would be like to be surrounded by green in every direction, to walk for days and never leave the shade, to hear life humming around you at every moment? Tonight, that's exactly where we're heading. Not with hiking boots or machetes, but with thought and story. Because in its own way, the Amazon rainforest is as much a frontier as the ocean depths or the surface of the moon. It's a reminder that even here on Earth, mysteries still surround us, waiting patiently in the green. And so, with the sounds of the forest quiet around us and the long journey just beginning, we can drift gently toward the heart of life itself, the point where diversity becomes so rich it almost defies comprehension. For much of human history, the Amazon was not seen as the ecological treasure we understand it to be today. To European colonizers and explorers, it was often viewed as an obstacle, a vast expanse of hostile wilderness standing between them and the riches of the interior. The forest was hot, humid, filled with insects and diseases, and nearly impossible to navigate. There were no roads, no clearings, just an endless tangle of green. Early maps showed the Amazon River snaking through the continent, but the forest itself was often depicted as blank space, marked only with vague warnings or speculative illustrations. Indigenous peoples, of course, had a very different relationship with the forest. For thousands of years, they lived within its embrace, developing sophisticated knowledge of its plants and animals. They knew which trees provided medicine, which fruits were edible, which animals could be hunted, and which should be avoided. They understood the cycles of rain and drought, the movements of fish in the rivers, and the patterns of animal behavior. The forest was not empty wilderness to them. It was a landscape rich with meaning and utility. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Amazon was far from untouched before European contact. Indigenous groups managed the forest, planting useful species, creating clearings for settlements, and enriching the soil with a mixture of charcoal and organic matter, known today as terra preta. These dark, fertile soils are still found scattered throughout the Amazon, evidence that human hands shaped parts of the forest long before modern deforestation began. In this sense, the idea of a pristine virgin rainforest is a myth. The Amazon has been home to people for millennia, and those people were active participants in its ecology. When Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they encountered indigenous populations that numbered in the millions. But disease, violence, and exploitation devastated these communities. Smallpox, measles, and other illnesses spread rapidly through populations that had no immunity. Within a century, the indigenous population of the Amazon had collapsed. With their decline, much of the knowledge they held about the forest was lost. The Spanish conquistador, Francisco de Orellana, was one of the first Europeans to travel the length of the Amazon River in 1542. His expedition reported encounters with large settlements along the riverbanks, but by the time later explorers arrived, many of these communities had vanished. The forest that Europeans later described as empty was, in many cases, a forest recovering from the absence of the people who had shaped it. As time passed, the Amazon became a symbol in the European imagination. It represented the exotic, the unknown, a place where nature reigned supreme and civilization had yet to impose order. Naturalists and explorers in the 18th and 19th centuries began to study the forest in earnest, collecting specimens of plants and animals, mapping rivers, and documenting the astonishing diversity they found. Alexander von Humboldt, the great German naturalist, explored the northern reaches of the Amazon basin and marveled at its complexity. His writings helped inspire a generation of scientists to see the rainforest not as an obstacle, but as a subject worthy of study. In the 19th century, the Amazon became economically important to the wider world through the rubber boom. The rubber tree, Hevea brasiliensis, is native to the Amazon, and its latex sap became essential for industrial production. Rubber barons grew rich, and cities like Manaus, in the heart of the forest, saw a brief period of opulence, with grand opera houses and European architecture rising incongruously among the trees. But the boom was short-lived. Seeds were smuggled out of Brazil and planted in Southeast Asia, where rubber plantations proved more efficient. The Amazon's rubber industry collapsed, and the forest returned to relative obscurity. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that the Amazon began to be understood in scientific terms as a global resource. Biologists realized that the forests harbored an extraordinary number of species, many of them found nowhere else on Earth. Climatologists discovered that the Amazon played a crucial role in regulating weather patterns, not just locally, but across the globe. The forest absorbed carbon dioxide, released oxygen, and generated rainfall that affected regions far beyond its borders. Suddenly, the Amazon was not just a South American concern, it was a planetary one. For the people who lived their lives within the forest, this shift in global attention was complex. On one hand, it brought recognition of the forest's value. On the other, it often ignored the rights and knowledge of indigenous communities who had been its stewards for centuries. Conservation efforts sometimes treated the forest as a place that should be left untouched, overlooking the fact that people had lived there sustainably for millennia. The tension between preservation, development, and indigenous rights continues to shape discussions about the Amazon today. The Amazon itself, as a geological and ecological feature, is ancient. The rainforest as we know it began to take shape around 55 million years ago, after the extinction of the dinosaurs. At that time, much of South America was covered by a vast inland sea. As the Andes Mountains rose along the western edge of the continent, they blocked moisture from the Pacific Ocean, trapping it over the interior. This created the conditions for rainforest to flourish. Over millions of years, the forest expanded and contracted with shifts in climate, but it persisted, evolving into the complex system we see today. The Amazon River, which gives the forest its name, is itself a relatively recent feature in geological terms. The river originally flowed westward, emptying into the Pacific. But as the Andes rose, they dammed the flow, creating a massive inland lake. Eventually, the river carved a new path eastward, breaking through to the Atlantic. Today, the Amazon River discharges more water than the next 7 largest rivers combined. It carries sediments from the Andes all the way to the ocean, enriching the waters of the Atlantic with nutrients from the forest. What's fascinating is how the forest and the river are interconnected. The river depends on the forest for rainfall, while the forest depends on the river for nutrients. Fish that live in the river feed on fruits and seeds that fall from trees. Birds and mammals spread seeds along the riverbanks. The water cycle, the nutrient cycle, and the life cycle are all woven together in a way that makes it difficult to separate one from the other. The Amazon is not just a forest or a river, it is a system. But to appreciate how remarkable that system is, it helps to think of the layers. The rainforest is not a flat, uniform blanket of green. It is structured vertically, with different zones stacked on top of each other, each with its own climate, its own inhabitants, its own rules. To walk through the Amazon is to move through these layers, from the dark, humid floor to the sunlit canopy far above. And each layer tells a different part of the story. Understanding these layers is key to understanding the forest itself. So, as we think about those early explorers peering into the green, wondering what lay within, and as we consider the indigenous peoples who knew every inch of it, it's worth remembering how recently the Amazon entered global consciousness in its full complexity. For most of our history, it was a mystery, a blank space on the map. Now, we are beginning to fill in the details, and what we are finding is more intricate, more beautiful, and more fragile than anyone imagined. And so, as we think about those blank spaces on early maps, about explorers staring into horizons of green and wondering where the forest ended, it's worth remembering how recently the Amazon became understood not just as a place, but as a living, breathing system that matters to the entire planet. We may take it for granted now, a symbol on environmental posters, a line in climate reports. But for most of human history, the forest was nothing more than a rumor, a story told by those who ventured in and emerged changed. When people first tried to map the Amazon in a serious way, they faced challenges unlike those of any other landscape. Rivers twisted and turned, tributaries branching in every direction. The forest canopy was so thick that landmarks were invisible from the ground. Without clear sight lines, navigation became guesswork. Early maps were often wildly inaccurate, showing rivers in the wrong places or forests where there were clearings. It took centuries of patient exploration, often led by indigenous guides, before the true shape of the Amazon began to emerge on paper. By the time aerial photography and satellite imagery became available in the 20th century, the scale of the forest could finally be grasped. From above, the Amazon looked like a vast green ocean, unbroken for thousands of kilometers. Rivers carved through it like silver threads, and occasional clearings showed where settlements or farms interrupted the green. But for the most part, it was continuous, a living carpet stretching across the continent. Those early satellite images were both beautiful and humbling, showing just how much of the forest remained unexplored. One of the breakthroughs in understanding the Amazon came with the development of canopy research. For a long time, scientists studied the forest from the ground, collecting samples of plants, observing animals, and mapping the terrain. But they quickly realized that the ground is only one part of the story. Most of the action in a rainforest happens high above, in the canopy where sunlight is abundant and life is most concentrated. To study the canopy, researchers needed new methods. In the 1980s and 90s, scientists began using construction cranes, towers, and even hot air balloons to access the treetops. They strung walkways between trees, creating suspended platforms hundreds of feet above the ground. From these vantage points, they discovered a world that was almost unknown. The canopy turned out to be teeming with life far more diverse than the forest floor. Insects, birds, mammals, amphibians, and plants that never touched the ground. It was like discovering a new continent in the sky. The Amazon canopy is now understood to be one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. A single tree in the canopy can host hundreds of species, from ants to orchids to tree frogs, vines and epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants, drape from every branch. Birds flit between trees, feeding on fruits and insects. Monkeys leap from limb to limb, their cries echoing through the air. And predators like harpy eagles patrol from above, scanning for prey. The canopy is a world unto itself, a green sky filled with life. But reaching the canopy was only the beginning. Scientists soon realized that the Amazon is not just diverse, it is also dynamic. The forest changes constantly, responding to seasons, storms, and the life cycles of its inhabitants. Trees grow, die, and fall, creating gaps in the canopy that are quickly filled by new growth. Seedlings race toward the light, competing for space. Animals migrate with the fruiting seasons, following waves of abundance across the forest. Rivers flood and recede, reshaping the landscape and creating new habitats. The discovery of this dynamism changed how scientists think about the Amazon. It is not a static museum of biodiversity, but a living, evolving system. Every species plays a role, from the smallest bacterium to the largest tree. Remove one piece, and the whole system shifts. This interconnectedness is part of what makes the Amazon so resilient, but also so vulnerable. It has adapted to disturbances over millions of years, but the speed and scale of modern threats are unlike anything it has faced before. As measurements became more precise, scientists began to quantify just how much life the Amazon contains. Estimates suggest there are around 16,000 species of trees, more than 300 species of mammals, over 1,000 species of birds, and possibly millions of species of insects, many of them still undescribed. Every year, new species are discovered, from tiny frogs no bigger than a fingernail, to fish with strange adaptations, to plants with unique chemical compounds. The forest is a library of evolution, each species a volume in a vast collection. But numbers alone do not capture the experience of the forest. To stand within it is to feel surrounded by life in a way that is difficult to describe. The air is thick with moisture, almost like breathing liquid. Sounds come from every direction: bird calls, insect buzzes, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a monkey. The light is dim and green, filtered through layers of foliage, and the smell, earthy and rich, is the scent of decay and growth happening simultaneously, of life feeding on life in an endless cycle. For scientists who work in the Amazon, the forest is both a laboratory and a teacher. It offers lessons about evolution, ecology, climate, and resilience. It shows how complex systems can maintain themselves through feedback loops and interdependencies. It demonstrates how diversity creates stability, how redundancy allows recovery. And it reminds us that there is still so much we do not know. Despite decades of study, the Amazon remains full of mysteries, questions that have not yet been answered, patterns that have not yet been understood. The process of discovery is slow, painstaking work. Researchers spend months in the field, often in remote areas accessible only by boat or small plane. They climb trees, wade through swamps, set camera traps, and collect samples. They analyze data, build models, and test hypotheses. Each study adds a small piece to the larger puzzle. But the puzzle is so vast that completion seems impossible. Perhaps that is part of the allure. The Amazon will never be fully known, not in any human lifetime. It will always hold more than we can grasp. And yet, the urgency to understand it has never been greater. As the forest faces pressures from deforestation, climate change, and development, scientists are racing to document what exists before it disappears. Species that have not yet been named may go extinct before anyone knows they were there. Ecosystems that have functioned for millennia may collapse before we understand how they worked. The discovery of the Amazon is still ongoing, but it is also a race against time. For those who love the forest, who study it, or simply admire it from afar, there is a bittersweet quality to its beauty. It is magnificent, but it is also fragile. It has survived for millions of years, but it may not survive the next century without significant change in how we treat it. The story of the Amazon is, therefore, not just a story of discovery, but also a story of responsibility. What we do now will determine whether future generations have the chance to stand beneath those towering trees, to hear the symphony of life, to feel the humid air, and see the dappled light filtering through the canopy. So the discovery of the Amazon, like the discovery of the Mariana Trench, is not one event, but an ongoing process. Each expedition, each study, each moment spent observing the forest adds to our understanding. And as that understanding grows, so does our appreciation for what the Amazon represents. It is not just a resource, not just a collection of species. It is a living system, a testament to the creativity of evolution, a reminder that Earth is still full of wonders. When scientists began to truly study the structure of the Amazon, what they found was a complexity that went far beyond simple observation. The rainforest is not a flat expanse of trees, but a carefully organized stack of life, each layer with its own character, its own climate, and its own community of organisms. These layers, from the ground to the tops of the tallest trees, create distinct habitats, almost like different worlds existing on top of one another. To understand the forest is to understand these layers and how they interact. At the very bottom is the forest floor. This is where most people imagine themselves when they think of walking through the jungle. It is dark here, with only about 2% of the sunlight that hits the canopy actually reaching the ground. The air is still heavy with humidity, and the temperature remains relatively constant, neither too hot nor too cold. The ground is covered with a thin layer of leaf litter, fallen branches, and decomposing plant material. Beneath this, the soil is surprisingly poor, thin and acidic, lacking the nutrients you might expect in such a lush environment. This seems paradoxical at first. How can the most biodiverse place on Earth have such poor soil? The answer lies in the speed of decomposition and the efficiency of nutrient cycling. In the warm, wet conditions of the rainforest, organic matter breaks down rapidly. Fungi, bacteria, insects, and other decomposers work quickly to recycle nutrients from dead plants and animals. But instead of accumulating in the soil, these nutrients are absorbed almost immediately by the roots of living plants. The forest essentially feeds on itself, maintaining fertility not through soil storage, but through constant turnover. Walking on the forest floor, you might see roots spreading across the surface, creating a network that looks almost like a web. These are shallow roots designed to quickly capture nutrients before they can leach away in the heavy rains. Some trees have buttress roots, massive flanges that extend from the trunk like the fins of a rocket, providing stability in the shallow soil. These roots are one of the iconic images of the rainforest, towering structures that anchor giants in soft earth. Life on the forest floor is surprisingly sparse compared to the layers above. Large animals are present, tapirs, peccaries, jaguars, but they are often hidden, moving quietly through the shadows. Most of the action happens higher up. Still, the floor has its own inhabitants. Army ants march in columns, devouring everything in their path. Leafcutter ants carry pieces of leaves back to their nests, where they cultivate fungus gardens. Termites build mounds that can stand taller than a person, and fungi, in astonishing variety, sprout from the decaying matter, their fruiting bodies appearing in shapes and colors that seem almost otherworldly. Above the forest floor is the understory, a layer of smaller trees and shrubs that exist in the shade of the canopy. This is a dim, quiet world where plants have adapted to low light conditions. Many have large, broad leaves to capture as much sunlight as possible. Some are young trees, waiting for a gap to open in the canopy above so they can race toward the light. Others are species that have evolved to thrive in the shade, never growing taller than a few meters. The understory is also home to many of the forest's most spectacular plants: heliconias with their bright red and orange bracts, gingers, and palms. Animals in the understory are often adapted to move through dense vegetation. Birds, like antbirds and manakins, forage among the leaves. Frogs, including the famous poison dart frogs, live here, their bright colors warning predators of their toxicity. Snakes, both venomous and non-venomous, drape over branches or hide among the leaf litter. And insects are everywhere, their diversity almost impossible to comprehend. A single square meter of understory can contain dozens of species of beetles, ants, flies, and more. Above the understory is the canopy, the true heart of the rainforest. This is where most of the forest's life is concentrated, a layer of treetops that forms a continuous ceiling roughly 30 to 45 meters above the ground. The canopy is bathed in sunlight, and it is here that the forest's productivity is highest. Trees compete fiercely for light, their crowns spreading wide to capture as much sun as possible. The canopy is not a solid surface, but a mosaic of leaves, branches, and gaps, creating a complex three-dimensional habitat. The trees of the canopy are often draped with epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants without parasitizing them. Orchids, bromeliads, ferns, and mosses cover the branches, creating miniature gardens high above the ground. These epiphytes absorb water and nutrients from the air and rain, and they provide habitat for countless small animals. The pools of water that collect in bromeliad leaves become breeding grounds for frogs and insects. Some animals spend their entire lives in the canopy and never descend to the ground. Canopy animals are often highly specialized. Monkeys, such as howler monkeys, spider monkeys, and capuchins, swing through the trees using prehensile tails and strong limbs. Sloths hang motionless from branches, moving so slowly that algae grows on their fur, camouflaging them in the green. Birds of every imaginable color flit through the canopy: toucans with their enormous beaks, macaws with their brilliant plumage, tanagers, parrots, and hummingbirds, and insects, always insects, from brilliant morpho butterflies to stick insects that look exactly like twigs. The canopy is also where much of the forest's reproduction happens. Trees flower and fruit here, attracting pollinators and seed dispersers. Bees, bats, birds, and even monkeys play roles in pollination. Many canopy trees produce fruits that are eaten by animals, which then disperse the seeds across the forest. This mutualism, the partnership between plants and animals, is one of the key drivers of the Amazon's diversity. Plants have evolved to offer rewards. Fruits, nectar, pollen, and animals have evolved to take advantage of them, spreading genes and diversity in the process. Above the main canopy, a few trees rise even higher, breaking through into what is called the emergent layer. These giants can reach heights of 60 meters or more, towering above their neighbors. They are exposed to full sunlight, wind and rain, and they must be strong to withstand these conditions. Emergent trees often have small, waxy leaves to reduce water loss and thick bark to protect against the elements. From the top of an emergent tree, the view is breathtaking. A sea of green stretching to the horizon, broken only by rivers and the occasional distant mountain. Eagles and hawks nest in emergent trees, using them as lookout posts to scan the canopy below for prey. Some bats roost here as well, taking advantage of the height for easy flight. The emergent layer is the most exposed part of the forest, subject to the full force of tropical storms and lightning strikes. Yet these trees endure, their roots anchored deep, their crowns reaching toward the sky. The vertical structure of the rainforest creates a diversity of microclimates. The forest floor is humid and dark, the understory is warm and still, the canopy is bright and breezy, and the emergent layer is hot and exposed. Each layer has its own temperature, light level, and moisture content. This stratification allows many more species to coexist than would be possible in a simpler environment. Instead of one habitat, the forest provides dozens, each with its own set of conditions and opportunities. Understanding these layers helps explain why the Amazon is so diverse. It is not just a large area, though size certainly matters. It is also a complex, three-dimensional space where life can pack itself into every available niche, from the fungi on the forest floor to the eagles in the emergent layer. Every organism has found a place. And because the forest has been stable for millions of years, evolution has had time to fine-tune these relationships, creating a web of interactions so intricate that scientists are still working to map it. The layers also interact with each other in important ways. Water that falls as rain on the canopy drips down through the understory to the forest floor, where it either soaks into the soil or runs off into streams. Nutrients that are released by decomposition on the floor are taken up by roots and transported to the canopy, where they fuel growth and reproduction. Animals move between layers, carrying seeds, pollen, and nutrients with them. A monkey feeding in the canopy may drop fruit to the forest floor, where it is eaten by a peccary. A bird nesting in the understory may catch insects that emerged from the leaf litter. The forest is a vertical ecosystem, interconnected at every level. For researchers who study the Amazon, accessing these layers is essential but challenging. The forest floor is relatively easy to reach, but the canopy and emergent layers require special equipment. Ropes, harnesses, and climbing techniques borrowed from mountaineering allow scientists to ascend into the treetops. Some research stations have built towers or walkways, platforms suspended high above the ground that allow long-term observation. From these vantage points, scientists can watch the forest in action, observing behaviors and interactions that would be invisible from below. The canopy has revealed surprises that have reshaped our understanding of rainforest ecology. For example, scientists once assumed that most pollination happened at ground level, but canopy research showed that much of it occurs high above. They discovered that some species of frogs live their entire lives in the canopy, breeding in water-filled bromeliads and never descending. They found that certain insects are found only in the emergent layer, adapted to conditions that would kill their relatives below. Each discovery adds nuance to the picture, showing that the forest is even more complex than imagined. The layers of the Amazon are not just a structural feature, they are a key to its success. By stacking life vertically, the forest maximizes the use of space and resources. It creates opportunities for specialization, allowing species to evolve in ways that would be impossible in a simpler environment. And it provides resilience, because disturbances that affect one layer may leave others untouched. A storm that topples an emergent tree creates a gap in the canopy, but the understory and forest floor remain intact. Over time, the gap fills in, and the forest continues. To walk through the Amazon, then, is to move through a living architecture, a cathedral built not of stone, but of wood, leaves, and life. The floor is the foundation, the understory, the nave, the canopy, the vault, and the emergent trees, the spires reaching toward heaven. Each part supports the others, and together they create something greater than the sum of their parts. It is a structure that has taken millions of years to build, and it functions with a precision that no human architect could match. When you think about the scale of that structure, about the way life is organized from the ground to the sky, it becomes easier to understand why the Amazon is so important. It is not just a forest, it is a system, a living machine that processes sunlight, water, and carbon into life itself. And as we drift further into that understanding, we begin to see how the forest connects not just vertically, but horizontally across vast distances, and even globally, influencing weather and climate far beyond its borders. Once you begin to picture the layers of the Amazon stacked like floors in a building made of green, the next thought that naturally follows is how all of this life is sustained. In most terrestrial ecosystems, soil is the foundation. Rich, deep soil stores nutrients and water, providing a stable base for plants to grow. But in the Amazon, as we've touched on, the soil is surprisingly poor. Thin, acidic, and low in nutrients, it seems inadequate to support the luscious forest on Earth. So how does the forest manage it? The answer lies in one of nature's most elegant solutions, a partnership between plants and fungi that is so intimate it blurs the line between individuals. This partnership is called mycorrhiza, a term that comes from the Greek words for fungus and root. Mycorrhizal fungi colonize the roots of trees and other plants, forming structures that extend far into the soil. These fungal threads, called hyphae, are incredibly fine, thinner than human hair, and they spread through the soil in vast networks. A single teaspoon of forest soil can contain kilometers of fungal hyphae. These fungi act as extensions of the plant's root system, reaching into spaces the roots cannot access, absorbing water and nutrients, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, and transporting them back to the plant. In return, the plant provides the fungus with sugars produced through photosynthesis. It is a trade, carbon for nutrients, and it is mutually beneficial. The plant gains access to resources it could not obtain alone, and the fungus gains a steady supply of energy. This relationship is ancient, dating back hundreds of millions of years, and it is found in most terrestrial ecosystems. But in the Amazon, where nutrients are scarce and competition is intense, mycorrhizal networks are especially important. What makes these networks even more remarkable is that they do not connect just one plant to one fungus. Instead, the fungi link multiple plants together, creating what scientists call the wood wide web. Through these fungal highways, trees and other plants can share resources. A large tree with deep roots and access to water might share that water with a smaller neighbor through the mycorrhizal network. A tree growing in a sunny gap might send excess sugars to a seedling struggling in the shade. The network allows the forest to redistribute resources, balancing abundance and scarcity across the community. Recent research has shown that these networks also carry information. When a tree is attacked by insects, it can send chemical signals through the mycorrhizal network, warning neighboring trees of the threat. Those trees can then ramp up their production of defensive compounds, preparing for the attack before it arrives. In this way, the forest communicates, not with words or sounds, but with chemistry. The underground network is a kind of nervous system, linking individuals into a collective. This idea that trees and plants are connected in ways we cannot see has captured the public imagination. It suggests that the forest is not just a collection of individuals competing for survival, but a community, a superorganism where cooperation is as important as competition. Some scientists caution against anthropomorphizing these relationships, pointing out that the networks are the result of evolution, not intention. The trees are not consciously helping each other. They are simply following chemical and biological processes. But even so, the outcome is the same: a forest that functions as a connected whole. The nutrient cycle in the Amazon is tightly closed. When a leaf falls from the canopy, it lands on the forest floor and begins to decompose. Fungi, bacteria, and insects break it down, releasing nutrients. But before those nutrients can leach away in the rain, they are absorbed by the shallow roots of nearby trees, often with the help of mycorrhizal fungi. The nutrients are then transported back up into the canopy, where they fuel new growth. The cycle is fast, efficient, and almost entirely internal. Very little is lost. This efficiency is crucial because the Amazon receives enormous amounts of rain, often more than 2 meters per year. With so much water moving through the system, nutrients could easily wash away if they were not recycled so quickly. The forest has evolved to be a closed loop, where waste from one organism becomes food for another. Death and life are intertwined, happening simultaneously, constantly, everywhere. But the mycorrhizal networks are not the only partnerships in the forest. The Amazon is full of symbiotic relationships, arrangements where 2 or more species depend on each other. Some of these are so specialized that the species involved cannot survive without their partners. Take, for example, the relationship between certain fig trees and fig wasps. Fig trees produce flowers inside a closed structure called a syconium, which will eventually become the fig fruit. The flowers are unreachable from the outside, so the tree depends entirely on tiny wasps to pollinate them. A female fig wasp enters the syconium through a narrow opening, often losing her wings and antennae in the process. Inside, she pollinates the flowers and lays her eggs. The wasp dies, but her offspring develop inside the fig, feeding on some of the seeds. When the young wasps mature, they mate inside the fig, and the females emerge, carrying pollen with them. They fly to another fig tree, repeating the cycle. Without the wasp, the fig tree cannot reproduce. Without the fig tree, the the wasp has no place to lay its eggs. The two are locked together, each essential to the other's survival. Figs, in turn, are crucial to the broader ecosystem. They fruit year-round, providing a reliable food source for many animals, especially during times when other trees are not producing fruit. Monkeys, bats, birds, and even fish in flooded forests depend on figs. The fig tree, through its partnership with the wasp, becomes a keystone species, supporting countless others. Remove the fig wasp, and the entire system begins to unravel. Another partnership involves leafcutter ants, which are among the most industrious creatures in the forest. These ants cut pieces of leaves and carry them back to their underground nests. But they do not eat the leaves. Instead, they chew them into a pulp and use it to cultivate a fungus. The fungus grows on the leaf pulp, and the ants feed on the fungus. It is agriculture, practiced by insects. The ants tend their fungal gardens carefully, weeding out competing species and adjusting conditions to keep the fungus healthy. In return, the fungus provides them with food, but the system is even more complex. The ants also carry bacteria on their bodies, bacteria that produce antibiotics. These antibiotics suppress harmful microbes that might infect the fungal gardens. So the ants, the fungus, and the bacteria form a three-way partnership, each contributing to the survival of the others. It is a system of checks and balances, evolved over millions of years, and it works with remarkable efficiency. Pollinators and plants have co-evolved in countless ways. Bees, bats, birds, and even beetles serve as pollinators, and plants have evolved to attract them. Some flowers are shaped to fit the beak of a specific hummingbird. Others release scent at night to attract bats. Some produce nectar with just the right sugar concentration to appeal to bees. And some, like the orchids, have evolved elaborate deceptions, mimicking the appearance or scent of female insects to trick males into attempting to mate, thereby transferring pollen. These relationships are finely tuned. A change in the population of one species can ripple through the system, affecting many others. If a pollinator declines, the plants it pollinates may struggle to reproduce. If a plant disappears, the animals that depend on it for food may starve. The Amazon is a web of dependencies, and each strand is connected to many others. Pull on one, and the whole structure shifts. Seed dispersal is another arena of partnership. Many trees produce fruits specifically to attract animals. The animals eat the fruit, and the seeds pass through their digestive systems, often unharmed. In fact, some seeds germinate better after being digested. The animal gets a meal, and the tree gets its seeds transported far from the parent, reducing competition and increasing the chances of successful germination. Birds are especially important seed dispersers, carrying seeds over long distances as they move through the forest. Large animals like tapirs and peccaries also play roles. They eat fallen fruits on the forest floor and disperse seeds as they roam. In some cases, the seeds of certain trees will not germinate unless they have passed through the gut of a specific animal. These trees are utterly dependent on their partners. If the animal goes extinct, the tree may follow, unable to reproduce. The partnerships extend even to the microbial level. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in nodules on the roots of certain plants, converting atmospheric nitrogen into forms the plant can use. In return, the plant provides the bacteria with sugars. This relationship is common in legumes, and it allows plants to thrive in nutrient-poor soils where nitrogen is limiting. In the Amazon, nitrogen fixation by bacteria is an important part of the nutrient cycle, helping to maintain the fertility of the system. All of these relationships, from mycorrhizal networks to fig wasps to leafcutter ants, create a forest that is more than the sum of its parts. The Amazon is not just a collection of species living side by side. It is a network, a system of interactions where cooperation and mutualism are as important as competition. The forest has evolved not just individuals, but relationships, and those relationships are what give it resilience and complexity. For scientists, studying these partnerships is endlessly fascinating. Each discovery reveals new layers of interconnection, new ways that species depend on each other. It also highlights the fragility of the system. Remove one species, and the effects can cascade through the network, causing unexpected consequences. The Amazon's strength lies in its diversity and its connections, but those connections also mean that damage in one part of the system can spread. As we drift through this understanding, it becomes clear that the forest is not a static thing. It is dynamic, constantly adjusting, constantly interacting. The trees are not silent, isolated beings. They are part of a conversation, a chemical dialogue carried through roots and fungi, through pollinators and seeds, through water and air. And that conversation has been ongoing for millions of years, a slow, patient exchange that has built the most complex ecosystem on land. When people think of the Amazon, they often imagine the animals, the jaguars prowling through the understory, the monkeys swinging through the canopy, the colorful birds that seem to embody the vibrancy of the tropics. And these creatures are indeed part of what makes the forest extraordinary. But the foundation of it all, the quiet, unseen work that makes everything else possible, is the partnerships, the fungi, threading through the soil, the wasps crawling into figs, the ants tending their gardens, the bacteria fixing nitrogen. These are the relationships that hold the forest together, and without them, the Amazon would not exist. Understanding these connections helps us see the forest not as a place, but as a process. It is constantly making itself, repairing itself, adapting to changes. It is resilient because it is diverse, and it is diverse because it is connected. And as we continue to explore, to climb into the canopy and dig into the soil, we keep finding more threads in the web, more partnerships we did not know existed. The Amazon still holds secrets, relationships that have not yet been discovered, species that depend on each other in ways we have not yet imagined. For now, though, we can pause and appreciate the elegance of it, the way a tree feeds a fungus, and the fungus feeds the tree, the way a wasp gives life to a fig, and the fig gives life to a forest, the way ants farm, fungus, and bacteria protect the farm. It is a symphony of mutualism, a testament to the creativity of evolution, and a reminder that life, at its best, is not about isolated survival, but about connection. When you begin to understand the intricate web of relationships in the Amazon, it becomes natural to ask how all of this affects the world beyond the forest. The Amazon is often called the lungs of the earth, a phrase that captures something important, though not entirely accurate. The forest does produce oxygen through photosynthesis, vast amounts of it, as plants convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars and release oxygen as a byproduct. But the forest also consumes oxygen through respiration, as plants and animals breathe and decompose. The net contribution of oxygen to the atmosphere is smaller than many people think, and much of the oxygen produced is used within the forest itself. However, the metaphor of lungs points to something real. The Amazon plays a critical role in regulating the global climate, not primarily through oxygen production, but through carbon storage and the water cycle. The trees of the Amazon lock up enormous amounts of carbon in their wood, leaves, and roots. Estimates suggest that the forest stores around 150 to 200 billion tons of carbon. That is carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, contributing to the greenhouse effect and warming the planet. By keeping this carbon locked away, the Amazon helps stabilize the climate. When trees are cut down or burned, that carbon is released. Deforestation in the Amazon is therefore not just a local problem, it is a global one. Every tree that falls releases its stored carbon, adding to the atmospheric load. And because the forest is being cleared at a rapid rate, the Amazon has, in some years, become a net source of carbon rather than a sink. This shift is alarming because it means the forest is no longer helping to slow climate change, but is instead contributing to it. Beyond carbon, the Amazon influences climate through its role in the water cycle. The forest is a massive engine of evapotranspiration, a process where water absorbed by roots is transported to leaves and released into the air as vapor. Every day, the trees of the Amazon pump billions of liters of water into the atmosphere. This water vapor rises, cools, and condenses into clouds, which then produce rain. Much of this rain falls back on the forest, creating a self-sustaining cycle. The forest, in a sense, makes its own weather, but the moisture does not stay confined to the Amazon. Winds carry the water vapor eastward, where it falls as rain in other parts of South America. The Rio de la Plata basin, which includes major agricultural regions in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, depends on rainfall that originates in the Amazon. Farmers in São Paulo rely on rain that was once water vapor above the forest. Hydroelectric dams in the region depend on rivers fed by Amazonian rain. The forest, though hundreds of miles away, shapes the livelihoods of millions of people. This atmospheric river, as scientists sometimes call it, is a critical feature of South America's climate. Disrupting it by cutting down the forest could have far-reaching consequences. With less forest, there is less evapotranspiration, which means less moisture in the air, which means less rain downwind. Studies have already shown that deforestation in the Amazon is correlated with changes in rainfall patterns in distant regions. Droughts become more frequent, rivers run lower, and agricultural yields decline. The forest, it turns out, is not just important for the Amazon basin, but for the entire continent. The influence extends even further. The Amazon affects global atmospheric circulation patterns. The heat and moisture released by the forest rise high into the atmosphere, where they influence wind patterns and pressure systems. These effects can propagate across the globe, affecting weather in North America, Europe, and beyond. Climate models suggest that large-scale deforestation in the Amazon could alter precipitation patterns as far away as the Sahel in Africa or the breadbaskets of the United States. The forest is a player on the global stage, its health and stability affecting systems far beyond its borders. The Amazon also influences ocean currents. The Amazon River discharges about 200,000 cubic meters of water per second into the Atlantic Ocean. carrying with it nutrients eroded from the Andes and organic matter from the forest. This freshwater plume spreads hundreds of kilometers into the ocean, creating a region of lower salinity that affects marine life. Nutrients from the river fertilize the ocean, supporting plankton blooms that form the base of the marine food web. Fish, dolphins, and seabirds all benefit from this influx of nutrients. The forest, through the river, feeds the sea. There's also a feedback loop between the forest and the climate. As global temperatures rise due to human-caused climate change, the Amazon is affected. Higher temperatures increase evaporation, which can stress trees. Changes in rainfall patterns with longer dry seasons make the forest more vulnerable to fire. And fires, once rare in the humid rainforest, are becoming more common as the climate changes and as humans set fires to clear land. These fires release carbon, which warms the planet further, which stresses the forest more, creating a vicious cycle. Scientists worry about a potential tipping point. If enough of the Amazon is lost, the forest might no longer be able to sustain its own climate. With less evapotranspiration, rainfall could decline, making the remaining forest drier and more prone to fire. Eventually, parts of the Amazon could transition from rainforest to savanna, a much less diverse ecosystem with lower carbon storage. Some models suggest that we are approaching this tipping point and that it could be reached within decades if current trends continue. The idea of a tipping point is sobering. It means that the Amazon is not infinitely resilient. It has endured for millions of years, but it depends on certain conditions: abundant rainfall, stable temperatures, and a critical mass of forest to maintain those conditions. Disrupt the balance too much, and the system could collapse, transforming into something unrecognizable. And once that transformation begins, it may be irreversible on human timescales. The rainforest that took millions of years to evolve could become savanna in a matter of decades. For the people who live in and around the Amazon, the forest's role in climate is not abstract. They see the changes in real time: dry seasons that last longer, rivers that run lower, crops that fail because the rains do not come when expected. Indigenous communities who have lived in the forest for generations speak of shifts in the behavior of animals, the timing of fruiting trees, and the predictability of seasons. These are signs, they say, that the forest is changing. The global importance of the Amazon means that its fate is not just a concern for Brazil or South America. It is a concern for everyone. International agreements, funding mechanisms, and conservation efforts increasingly recognize this. Programs like RED+, which stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, aim to provide financial incentives for countries to protect their forests. The idea is that the carbon stored in forests, like the Amazon, has global value, and that value should be recognized and compensated. But these efforts are complicated by issues of sovereignty, economics, and equity. The countries that contain the Amazon have the right to develop their resources, and many of their citizens are poor and see the forest as an obstacle to prosperity. Balancing conservation with development is one of the great challenges of our time. It requires not just good science, but also diplomacy, creativity, and a willingness to think beyond short-term gains. The Amazon's role in climate is also a reminder of how interconnected the world is. A forest in South America affects rainfall in Argentina. fisheries in the Atlantic, and weather patterns in North America. A tree cut down in Brazil releases carbon that warms the entire planet, and a warming planet, in turn, threatens the forest. The connections are global, and they operate on timescales, both fast and slow. A fire burns in minutes, but the carbon it releases will warm the atmosphere for decades. A tree takes centuries to grow, but it can be cut down in an hour. Understanding these connections changes how we think about the forest. It is not just a beautiful place, though it is certainly that. It is not just a reservoir of biodiversity, though it is that too. It is also a regulator, a stabilizer, a part of the machinery that keeps the planet habitable. The Amazon is, in a very real sense, infrastructure. Not infrastructure built by humans, but infrastructure built by nature over eons and now relied upon by billions. As we drift through this understanding, it becomes clear that the Amazon is not separate from the rest of the world. It is woven into the fabric of the Earth's climate system, a green thread that runs through the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the energy balance of the planet. To lose the Amazon would not just mean losing trees and animals. It would mean losing a piece of the system that makes the planet work. And that loss would be felt everywhere, from the farms of São Paulo to the rivers of Africa, from the storm tracks of the Atlantic to the droughts of the American Midwest. For those who study the forest, this knowledge brings a sense of urgency. The Amazon is not just important, it is essential, and it is at risk. The next section of its story is being written now. In the decisions made by governments, communities, and individuals. What happens to the Amazon in the coming decades will shape the climate, the ecosystems, and the future of the planet. It is a story still unfolding, and we are all part of it. When people imagine the Amazon, they often picture an untouched wilderness, a place where nature reigns and humans are absent. But this image, though romantic, is incomplete. The Amazon has been home to people for at least 12,000 years and possibly much longer. Archaeological evidence, oral histories, and genetic studies all point to a long and complex human presence in the forest. The people who lived there were not passive observers. They shaped the forest, managed its resources, and developed intricate knowledge of its ecology. To understand the Amazon, we must also understand the people who call it home. Before European contact, the Amazon basin was far from empty. Estimates of the pre-Columbian population vary widely, but some scholars believe there may have been as many as 5 to 10 million people living in the region. They lived in villages and towns along the major rivers, some of which were large and complex. They cultivated crops, hunted, fished, and managed the forest in ways that increased its productivity. They were not living lightly on the land in the way that modern conservationists sometimes imagine. They were actively shaping it, and they left their mark in ways we are only now beginning to understand. One of the most striking pieces of evidence is the presence of terra preta, the dark, fertile soils found scattered throughout the Amazon. These soils are unlike the natural soils of the rainforest. They are rich in charcoal, organic matter, and nutrients, and they remain fertile for centuries. Archaeologists believe that indigenous peoples created terra preta intentionally by adding charcoal from fires, food waste, and other organic materials to the soil. Over time, these additions built up, transforming poor rainforest soil into rich agricultural land. Today, Patches of terra preta are still used for farming, and they support crops far better than the surrounding soil. The existence of terra preta suggests that the Amazon was not a wilderness, but a managed landscape. Indigenous groups cultivated plants, some of which, like cacao, Brazil nuts, and acai, are now economically important. They cleared small areas for agriculture, but they did so in ways that did not destroy the forest. Slash and burn techniques, when practiced sustainably, allow the forest to regenerate. Fields are used for a few years, then abandoned and allowed to grow back, while new fields are cleared elsewhere. This shifting cultivation maintained the forest's overall structure while providing food and resources. Indigenous groups also managed animal populations through hunting and by protecting certain areas. They understood the behavior and ecology of the animals they depended on, and they adjusted their practices to avoid overhunting. They knew which trees attracted certain animals, and they planted those trees near their settlements. In this way, they engineered the forest to be more productive, creating a landscape that was both wild and cultivated, natural and human. When Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they brought with them diseases to which indigenous peoples had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other illnesses spread rapidly through the densely populated river valleys. Within a few generations, the population collapsed. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the indigenous population died in the first century after contact. Entire cultures vanished. Languages were lost, and the knowledge that had been accumulated over millennia disappeared with the people who held it. The forest that Europeans explored in the 17th and 18th centuries was, in many ways, a forest recovering from catastrophe. The large settlements along the rivers were gone, overgrown by vegetation. The agricultural fields had reverted to forest. To later explorers, the Amazon looked like a pristine wilderness, untouched by humans. But it was not. It was a landscape shaped by people, now empty in the process of rewilding. Today, there are still indigenous peoples living in the Amazon, though their numbers are much smaller than before contact. Estimates suggest there are around 1 million indigenous people in the Amazon basin, belonging to more than 400 different ethnic groups. Each group has its own language, culture, and relationship with the forest. Some live in relative isolation, maintaining traditional ways of life with minimal contact with the outside world. Others have adopted modern technologies and participate in the broader economy, but still retain their cultural identities and their ties to the land. For many indigenous groups, the forest is not just a place to live. It is a part of their identity. Their languages have the words for hundreds of plant and animal species, reflecting deep knowledge of the ecosystem. They know which plants are medicinal, which are edible, which are poisonous, and which are useful for building, weaving, or making tools. This knowledge, accumulated over generations, is a library of ecological information, much of it not found in scientific literature. Ethnobotanists, scientists who study the relationship between people and plants, have worked with indigenous communities to document this knowledge. They have discovered that traditional healers use hundreds of plant species to treat ailments, from fevers to infections to snake bites. Some of these plants have been studied by pharmaceutical companies, leading to the development of modern medicines. Quinine, used to treat malaria, comes from the bark of the cinchona tree, knowledge of which came from indigenous peoples. The venom of certain frogs, used by indigenous hunters to poison their darts, has been studied for its potential medical applications. The forest, through the knowledge of its people, has contributed to global health. But the relationship is not always fair. Indigenous knowledge has sometimes been exploited without compensation or recognition. Companies have patented products derived from traditional knowledge, profiting while the communities that held that knowledge received nothing. This has led to calls for stronger protections of indigenous intellectual property and for benefit-sharing agreements that ensure communities are compensated when their knowledge is used. Beyond knowledge, indigenous peoples are also some of the most effective stewards of the forest. Studies have shown that deforestation rates are significantly lower in indigenous territories than in unprotected areas. This is partly because indigenous communities have a vested interest in maintaining the forest, which provides them with food, medicine, and materials. But it is also because many indigenous cultures have a worldview that emphasizes respect for nature and the interconnectedness of all life. They see themselves not as separate from the forest, but as part of it. Indigenous territories cover about 28% of the Amazon basin, but they contain a much higher percentage of the remaining intact forest. In many cases, these territories serve as buffers against deforestation, slowing the advance of agriculture and development. Recognizing and protecting indigenous land rights is therefore not just a matter of justice, it is also one of the most effective conservation strategies available. However, indigenous communities in the Amazon face significant threats. Illegal logging, mining, and land grabbing encroach on their territories. Violence against indigenous leaders is common, and many have been killed for defending their land. Governments sometimes fail to enforce laws protecting indigenous rights, and in some cases, actively undermine those rights in favor of economic development. The struggle to protect the forest is, in many ways, a struggle to protect the people who have lived in it for millennia. In recent years, there has been growing recognition of the importance of including indigenous voices in discussions about the Amazon's future. International organizations, conservation groups, and even some governments are working more closely with indigenous communities, seeking their input and supporting their efforts to protect the forest. There is a growing understanding that conservation cannot be imposed from the outside, but must work with the people who know the land best. Indigenous activism has also become more visible on the global stage. Leaders like Raoni Metuktire, a Kayapo chief from Brazil, have traveled the world advocating for the protection of the Amazon and the rights of indigenous peoples. Young indigenous activists use social media to share their stories and mobilize support. They are demanding not just protection, but also respect, recognition, and the right to determine their own futures. The story of the Amazon is, in many ways, the story of its people. It is a story of resilience, of survival in the face of overwhelming loss. It is a story of knowledge accumulated over generations, now at risk of being lost again. It is a story of struggle, as communities fight to defend their land against powerful economic and political forces. And it is a story of hope, as indigenous peoples and their allies work to protect the forest for future generations. For those of us who live far from the Amazon, it can be easy to think of the forest as a distant, abstract place. But it is home to real people, with real lives, real cultures, and real connections to the land. Their fate and the fate of the forest are intertwined. Protecting the Amazon means supporting the people who have been its stewards for millennia. It means recognizing their rights, valuing their knowledge, and listening to their voices. As we drift through this understanding, it becomes clear that the Amazon is not just an ecological issue, it is also a human one. The forest cannot be saved without the people who live in it, and the people cannot thrive without the forest. The two are inseparable, woven together by history, culture, and survival. And as the next chapter of the Amazon story unfolds, it will be written not just by scientists and policymakers, but by the indigenous peoples who have always been its true guardians. When you think about the Amazon, it is almost impossible not to think about the animals. The forest is home to an astonishing variety of creatures, from the smallest insects to the largest mammals, from the rivers to the canopy, from the vibrant to the camouflaged. Each species has its own story, its own adaptations, its own role in the ecosystem. To walk through the Amazon, even in imagination, is to be surrounded by life in forms so diverse they seem almost impossible. Start with the insects. They are everywhere, in numbers that stagger the imagination. Ants alone may represent up to 15% of the forest's animal biomass. Leafcutter ants march in columns, carrying pieces of leaves back to their nests. Army ants swarm across the forest floor, devouring everything in their path. Bullet ants, named for the excruciating pain of their sting, patrol the trees. And termites build mounds that can tower several meters high, housing colonies that number in the millions. Butterflies add splashes of color to the understory. The blue morpho, with its iridescent wings that shimmer in the dappled light, is one of the most iconic. But there are thousands of other species in every imaginable color and pattern. Some butterflies are so small they look like flecks of dust. Others have wingspans the size of a human hand. They feed on nectar, on rotting fruit, and even on the tears of reptiles. Their larvae, caterpillars, feed on leaves, and some have evolved chemical defenses that make them toxic to predators. Beetles are perhaps the most diverse group of all. They range from tiny weevils to massive titan beetles, one of the largest insects in the world. Some beetles bore into wood, others feed on fungi, and still others are predators, hunting smaller insects. The sheer variety of beetle forms and lifestyles is a testament to the power of evolution to fill every conceivable niche. Then there are the amphibians. Frogs are abundant in the Amazon, and they come in astonishing varieties. Poison dart frogs, small and brilliantly colored, secret toxins through their skin, a warning to predators that they are dangerous to eat. The toxins, derived from the insects they consume, can be lethal. Indigenous peoples have used these toxins to coat the tips of their hunting darts, hence the name. Glass frogs, with transparent skin that allows you to see their internal organs, cling to leaves overhanging streams. Tree frogs with adhesive toe pads climb through the canopy, some spending their entire lives without touching the ground. Reptiles are also well represented. Snakes, from tiny thread snakes to massive anacondas, inhabit the forest. The green anaconda, one of the largest snakes in the world, can grow over 6 meters long and weigh more than 200 kilograms. It is an ambush predator. lurking in rivers and swamps, waiting for prey to come within striking distance. It constricts its victims, squeezing until they suffocate, then swallows them whole. Despite their fearsome reputation, anacondas are shy and rarely encounter humans. Caimans, relatives of alligators and crocodiles, bask on riverbanks and hunt in the water. The black caiman is the largest predator in the Amazon, capable of taking prey as large as capybaras or even jaguars. Iguanas and basilisk lizards climb through the trees, while smaller geckos and anoles dart across leaves and bark. Birds are among the most visible and vocal inhabitants of the forest. The Amazon is home to over 1,000 species of birds, more than anywhere else on Earth. Macaws, with their bright plumage and loud calls, are perhaps the most iconic. They fly in pairs, mated for life, and feed on fruits and nuts. Toucans, with their oversized, colorful beaks, are also unmistakable. Their beaks, though large, are surprisingly light, made of a honeycomb structure that is strong, but not heavy. Parrots chatter in the canopy, their green feathers blending perfectly with the leaves until they take flight. Hummingbirds, some no bigger than a thumb, hover in front of flowers, their wings beating so fast they are a blur. Harpy eagles, among the most powerful birds of prey in the world, nest in the emergent layer, hunting monkeys and sloths. And the hoatzin, a strange bird with clawed wings and a digestive system more like a cow's than a bird's, lives along rivers and lakes, feeding on leaves. The forest floor and understory are patrolled by ground-dwelling birds, like tinamous, which look like small, plump chickens, and antbirds, which follow army ant swarms, catching insects fleeing the ants. At night, the forest comes alive with the calls of potoos and nightjars, birds that hunt insects in the dark. Mammals, too, are diverse. Jaguars, the largest cats in the Americas, are the apex predators of the Amazon. They are solitary, powerful, and elusive, hunting everything from deer to caimans. Their bite is strong enough to crack the shells of turtles and the skulls of their prey. Despite their power, jaguars are rarely seen, preferring to move through the forest like ghosts. Smaller cats like ocelots, margais, and jaguarundis also inhabit the forest, hunting birds, rodents, and reptiles. Margais are particularly skilled climbers, able to descend trees head first, and they sometimes mimic the calls of prey to lure in their victims. Monkeys are among the most charismatic animals of the canopy. Howler monkeys announce their presence with deep, resonant calls that can be heard kilometers away. Spider monkeys swing through the trees with agility, their prehensile tails acting like a fifth limb. Capuchins are intelligent and resourceful, using tools to crack open nuts. Tamarins and marmosets, small and delicate, flit through the branches, feeding on insects and tree sap. And the wakari, with its bright red face, lives in flooded forests, feeding on seeds and fruits. Sloths move slowly through the canopy, so slowly that algae grows on their fur, giving them a greenish tint. This camouflage helps them blend into the foliage, avoiding predators. Sloths spend most of their lives hanging upside down, descending to the ground only once a week to defecate. Their slow metabolism allows them to survive on a diet of leaves, which are low in nutrients and hard to digest. Anteaters, with their long snouts and sticky tongues, feed exclusively on ants and termites. Giant anteaters roam the forest floor, while tamanduas and silky anteaters climb trees. They have powerful claws for breaking into ant and termite nests. and their tongues can extend deep into the colonies, lapping up insects by the thousands. Capybaras, the world's largest rodents, live along rivers and lakes. They are social animals, living in groups, and they are semi-aquatic, spending much of their time in the water to escape predators and stay cool. They feed on grasses and aquatic plants, and they are preyed upon by caimans, anacondas, and jaguars. Bats are incredibly diverse in the Amazon, with over 100 species. Some are insectivores, catching insects on the wing. Others are frugivores, feeding on fruits and dispersing seeds across the forest. Nectar-feeding bats pollinate flowers, and vampire bats, found only in the Americas, feed on the blood of mammals and birds. Despite their sinister reputation, vampire bats are small, delicate, and pose little threat to humans. River dolphins, including the pink river dolphin and the grey river dolphin, swim through the murky waters of the Amazon and its tributaries. They navigate by echolocation, emitting clicks and listening for the echoes to find fish and avoid obstacles. The pink dolphin, also called the boto, is the subject of many local legends and is considered a symbol of the river. Manatees, gentle aquatic herbivores, also inhabit the Amazon's rivers and flooded forests. They graze on aquatic plants, moving slowly through the water, surfacing occasionally to breathe. They are vulnerable to boat strikes and habitat loss, and their populations are declining. Fish are perhaps the most diverse group of vertebrates in the Amazon, with over 3,000 species described, and likely many more yet to be discovered. They range from tiny tetras, popular in aquariums, to massive arapaima, which can grow over 2 meters long and weigh over 100 kilograms. The arapaima is an air breather, rising to the surface to gulp air, an adaptation to the low oxygen levels in some Amazonian waters. Piranhas, famous for their sharp teeth and feeding frenzies, are actually mostly scavengers and feed on a variety of foods, including fruits and seeds. Electric eels, which are not true eels but a type of knifefish, can generate electric shocks powerful enough to stun prey or deter predators. And the candiru, a tiny parasitic catfish, has a fearsome reputation for entering the orifices of larger animals, though attacks on humans are extremely rare. The diversity of life in the Amazon is not just a list of species, it is a web of interactions. Predators and prey, pollinators and plants, decomposers and detritus, all are connected. Every animal plays a role, and the loss of one can affect many others. The jaguar controls populations of herbivores, preventing overgrazing. The harpy eagle keeps monkey populations in check. Seed dispersers like birds and bats ensure that plants can colonize new areas. Decomposers break down organic matter, recycling nutrients back into the soil. For scientists, cataloging the animals of the Amazon is a monumental task, one that is far from complete. New species are discovered regularly, and many more likely remain unknown. Each discovery adds to our understanding of the forest's complexity and underscores the importance of preserving it. The Amazon is not just a collection of animals. It is a living archive of evolutionary history, a testament to the creativity and resilience of life. As we drift through this menagerie, imagining the calls of howler monkeys, the flash of a morpho butterfly, the stealthy tread of a jaguar, it becomes clear that the Amazon is more than a place. It is a community, a congregation of life forms that have evolved together over millions of years. To lose even a piece of it is to lose something irreplaceable, a thread in the tapestry that, once pulled, can never be rewoven. When people think about threats to the Amazon, one image often comes to mind: the plume of smoke rising from a burning forest, the sound of chainsaws echoing through the trees, the vast clearings where green once stood. Deforestation is the most visible and immediate threat the forest faces, and its scale is staggering. Every year, thousands of square kilometers of rainforest are cleared, converted into farmland, pasture, or simply destroyed. The loss is not just of trees, but of entire ecosystems, species, and the services the forest provides. The reasons for deforestation are complex and interconnected. At the heart of it is economics. The Amazon sits on top of valuable resources. The land can be cleared for cattle ranching, which is one of the primary drivers of deforestation. Beef production is profitable, and large areas of forest are burned to create pasture. Soybeans, another major export crop, are grown on cleared land, feeding livestock around the world. Gold, minerals, and timber are extracted from the forest, often illegally, leaving scars on the landscape. Road building has also played a major role. Highways cut through the forest, opening up remote areas to settlement and development. The Trans-Amazonian Highway, built in the 1970s, was intended to connect the interior of Brazil to the coast, promoting economic development and national integration. But it also made vast areas of forest accessible to loggers, ranchers, and farmers. Along the highways, a pattern of deforestation emerges, often called fishbone deforestation, because of its appearance from the air. Side roads branch off from the main highway, and clearings spread outward from these roads, consuming the forest piece by piece. The process often begins with illegal logging. Valuable hardwoods like mahogany are selectively cut and sold. This opens up the forest, making it easier for others to enter. Landless farmers, encouraged by government policies or driven by poverty, move in and clear small plots for subsistence farming. But the soil, as we've discussed, is poor, and after a few years, the land is exhausted. The farmers move on, clearing new areas, and the abandoned land is often taken over by cattle ranchers who consolidate small plots into large pastures. Fire is a tool used in this process. During the dry season, fires are set to clear vegetation. In a healthy rainforest, these fires would not spread because the forest is too wet. But in areas that have been logged or partially cleared, the forest becomes drier and fires can rage out of control. These fires kill trees, destroy habitat, and release enormous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. In recent years, the number and intensity of fires in the Amazon have increased, with devastating effects. The smoke from these fires can blanket entire cities, darkening the sky and causing respiratory problems for millions of people. In 2019, fires in the Amazon attracted global attention as images of the burning forest circulated on social media. The fires were not natural. They were set by people, often with the tacit approval of authorities who saw development as more important than conservation. The international outcry put pressure on governments to take action, but the fires continued, and the forest continued to burn. Deforestation is not just an environmental issue, it is also a human rights issue. Indigenous communities whose lands are being invaded and destroyed have been fighting back, often at great personal risk. Activists and environmental defenders are murdered with alarming frequency. According to some reports, Brazil is one of the deadliest countries in the world for environmental activists. These individuals are targeted because they stand in the way of powerful economic interests. Their deaths send a message that resistance will not be tolerated. The impacts of deforestation extend far beyond the immediate loss of trees. When the forest is cleared, the complex web of interactions that sustains it is destroyed. Species lose their habitat, and populations decline. Some species are so specialized that they cannot survive outside the forest, and when their habitat is gone, they go extinct. The Amazon is home to many endemic species found nowhere else on Earth, and their loss is permanent. Deforestation also disrupts the water cycle. As trees are cut down, less moisture is released into the atmosphere, which means less rain. This creates a feedback loop. Less rain makes the forest drier, which makes it more vulnerable to fire, which clears more forest, which reduces rain further. Some scientists warn that if deforestation continues at the current rate, the Amazon could reach a tipping point where large areas transition from rainforest to savanna. This would be a catastrophic shift, not just for the region, but for the global climate. The carbon released by deforestation is another major concern. When trees are burned or left to rot, the carbon they have stored for decades or centuries is released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Deforestation in the Amazon is responsible for a significant portion of Brazil's greenhouse gas emissions, and it contributes to global warming. The forest, which once helped to stabilize the climate, is now contributing to its destabilization. Climate change, in turn, is making the Amazon more vulnerable. Higher temperatures, changes in rainfall patterns, and more frequent droughts are stressing the forest. Some models predict that even without additional deforestation, climate change alone could cause large parts of the Amazon to die back. Combined with ongoing clearing, the risk of catastrophic collapse is real. There are efforts to combat deforestation, but they are often underfunded, under-enforced, and undermined by political and economic pressures. Protected areas and indigenous territories, as mentioned earlier, are among the most effective barriers to deforestation, but they are under constant threat. Illegal loggers and miners invade these areas with impunity, and enforcement is weak or non-existent. Conservation organizations work to monitor and protect the forest, using satellite imagery to track deforestation in real time and alerting authorities to illegal activity. But the scale of the problem is enormous. International agreements, like the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, recognize the importance of protecting forests. Mechanisms like RGDD+ provide financial incentives for countries to reduce deforestation. But implementation has been slow, and funding is often insufficient. The economic pressures to clear the forest are immediate and powerful, while the benefits of conservation are diffuse and long-term. Convincing governments and individuals to prioritize the future over the present is one of the great challenges of conservation. Consumer choices in distant countries also play a role. The beef and soy produced on cleared Amazonian land are exported around the world. By choosing products that are not linked to deforestation, consumers can reduce demand and pressure companies to adopt more sustainable practices. Certification schemes, like those for sustainably sourced palm oil or timber, aim to provide consumers with information about the environmental impact of their purchases. But these schemes are not perfect, and enforcement is difficult. there is also hope. Deforestation rates have fluctuated over the years, and there have been periods of significant decline. In the mid-2000s, Brazil implemented policies that reduced deforestation by over 70%. Satellite monitoring, enforcement of environmental laws, and the expansion of protected areas all played roles. This shows that when there is political will, progress is possible. But gains can be reversed quickly when priorities shift, as has happened in recent years. Reforestation and restoration efforts are also underway. Planting trees is not a simple solution. It takes decades for a forest to mature, and planted forests often lack the diversity and complexity of natural ones. But restoration can help to reconnect fragmented habitats, stabilize soils, and begin to rebuild ecosystems. Some projects are working with indigenous communities and local people to restore degraded land, combining traditional knowledge with modern science. The fight to save the Amazon is far from over. It is a struggle that involves science, politics, economics, and human rights. It requires action at every level, from international agreements to individual choices. And it requires a recognition that the forest is not just valuable for what it provides, but for what it is, a living, breathing system that has existed for millions of years and that deserves to be protected for its own sake, as well as for ours. As we think about the threats the forest faces, it can feel overwhelming. The scale of deforestation, the power of the economic forces driving it, the political obstacles to change, all of these can seem insurmountable. But it is important to remember that the forest is resilient. It has survived ice ages, droughts, and shifts in climate. It has the capacity to recover if given the chance. The question is whether we will give it that chance. For those who love the Amazon, whether they have walked through it or simply dreamed of it, the current crisis is heartbreaking. But it is also a call to action. Every voice raised, every choice made with the forest in mind, every effort to support conservation and indigenous rights adds to the momentum for change. The future of the Amazon is not yet written. It will be determined by the decisions we make now, individually and collectively, and by the recognition that the forest is not just a distant place, but a part of the global commons, essential to all of us. As we near the end of our journey through the Amazon, it is worth pausing to reflect on what this forest means, not just ecologically or climatically, but symbolically. The Amazon has always been more than a physical place. It is an idea, a symbol of wildness, of abundance, of mystery. For centuries, it has captured human imagination, inspiring stories, art, and dreams. It represents the parts of the world that remain beyond our control, the places where nature still reigns. In literature, the Amazon has been a setting for adventure and discovery. From the early accounts of explorers to modern novels and films, the forest has been portrayed as a place of danger and beauty, where humans are tested and transformed. It is the green hell of some narratives, a hostile environment that resists human intrusion. But it is also the Edenic paradise of others, a place of infinite abundance and wonder. Both images capture something true. The forest is both, depending on perspective. For scientists, the Amazon is a laboratory, a place where the principles of ecology, evolution, and climate science are written in living form. It is where theories are tested, where new discoveries are made, and where the complexity of life is revealed in all its intricacy. The forest has taught us about symbiosis, about nutrient cycling, about the importance of diversity. It has shown us that ecosystems are not just collections of parts, but integrated wholes. For Indigenous peoples, their Amazon is home, a place imbued with meaning, history, and spirit. It is where their ancestors lived, where their cultures were born, and where their future lies. The forest is not separate from them. It is part of their identity, their livelihood, and their worldview. To lose the forest would be to lose a part of themselves. For the rest of the world, the Amazon is a barometer, a measure of our relationship with nature. How we treat the forest reflects our values, our priorities, and our vision for the future. If we allow it to be destroyed for short-term gain, we signal that profit matters more than preservation, that the present matters more than the future, that human desires override all other considerations. But if we choose to protect it, we signal the opposite, that we value diversity, that we recognize interdependence, that we are willing to make sacrifices for the greater good. The Amazon also reminds us of humility. Despite all our technology, all our knowledge, we are still dependent on natural systems. The forest provides services, oxygen production, carbon storage, climate regulation, water cycling, that we cannot replicate artificially. We need the Amazon, even if we do not live near it, even if we never visit it. Its health affects our health. Its stability affects our stability. Its future affects our future. There is also a spiritual dimension. For many, the Amazon represents something sacred, a cathedral of green where the divine can be felt in the rustle of leaves, the call of birds, the flow of water. It is a place that inspires awe, that reminds us of forces larger than ourselves. Standing in the forest, surrounded by life in all its forms, it is impossible not to feel a sense of wonder, a recognition that we are part of something vast and ancient. As we think about the future, it is tempting to despair. The threats are real, the losses are mounting, and the political will to act is inconsistent. But despair is not useful. It paralyzes, it silences, and it makes inaction seem inevitable. Instead, we must hold on to hope, not blind optimism, but a grounded hope that recognizes the challenges and still believes change is possible. Hope that is informed by science, guided by ethics, and sustained by action. The Amazon story is not over. It is still being written, and we are all authors, whether we realize it or not. Every choice we make, every product we buy, every voice we raise contributes to the narrative. We can choose to be part of the problem, or we can choose to be part of the solution. The forest cannot speak for itself, but we can speak for it. We can demand that governments protect it, that companies operate sustainably, that communities are supported, and that the rights of Indigenous peoples are respected. Education is also crucial. The more people understand about the Amazon, its ecology, its importance, its threats, the more they are likely to care. Documentaries, books, articles, and conversations all help to raise awareness and inspire action. Teachers, scientists, journalists, and storytellers all have roles to play in bringing the forest into the consciousness of people who might never see it in person. Technology, too, offers tools. Satellite monitoring can track deforestation in real time. Drones can survey remote areas. Apps can help consumers make informed choices. Social media can amplify the voices of activists and communities. These tools are not silver bullets, but they are assets in the fight to protect the forest. Ultimately, The Amazon's future depends on a shift in values, a recognition that nature has intrinsic worth, not just instrumental value. The forest is important not just because it provides services to humans, but because it exists, because it is home to millions of species, because it is beautiful, complex, and irreplaceable. This shift requires a change in how we think about our place in the world, moving from a mindset of domination to one of stewardship, from exploitation to respect. As we drift toward the end of this journey, let yourself imagine the forest one more time. Picture the layers, from the dark floor to the sunlit canopy. Picture the animals, the jaguars and monkeys, the birds and insects, the fish and frogs. Picture the trees, towering and ancient, connected by invisible threads of fungi. Picture the rivers, winding through green, carrying life from the mountains to the sea. Picture the people, the indigenous communities who have lived there for millennia, and the scientists who study it with dedication and passion. And then picture a choice to protect this place, to ensure that future generations can experience its wonder, that species can continue to evolve, that the forest can continue to breathe and cycle and live. Picture a world where the Amazon is not a casualty of progress, but a symbol of our ability to coexist with nature, to value what is wild, and to recognize that our fate and the forest's fate are intertwined. The Amazon is more than trees. It is a system, a community, a symphony. It is life in all its abundance and complexity. It is resilience and fragility, ancient and dynamic, familiar and mysterious. It is a gift, one that has been given to us by millions of years of evolution, and one that we have the responsibility to pass on. So let your thoughts settle like leaves falling to the forest floor, slowly, gently, returning to the earth. Let the sounds of the forest fade into the background, a soft hum that blends with the rhythm of your breath. There is nothing more you need to do. No more questions to answer, no more problems to solve. Just the quiet knowledge that the forest exists, that it is out there, breathing, living, waiting. And if sleep comes, let it take you gently, as if you were drifting down through the canopy, through layers of green, into the soft, dark embrace of the forest floor. Rest now, knowing that the Amazon endures, that its story continues, and that you are part of it, connected by invisible threads, by shared breath, by the simple fact of being alive on this earth. Thank you for spending this time exploring with me. If you found this journey soothing, if it kept you company, or if it helped you drift a little closer to sleep, you are always welcome to return here whenever you need it. And if you would like to hear more quiet explorations like this, you can follow along by subscribing or by leaving a small sign of support. It helps keep these voyages going, so that together we can keep wandering into the mysteries of science and the calm they bring. For now, let your mind rest in the green. Let the forest hold you in its ancient embrace, and may your sleep be as deep and as peaceful as the heart of the rainforest itself. Good night, and until next time, may your rest be as calm as the oldest trees, and your dreams as vibrant as the life that fills the canopy.